Shabbat Sholom.
Shabbat Shalom.
As many of you know, I was in Israel this last week with about 40 rabbis and lay leaders from around the world with the Masorti conservative movement. The goal of the mission was to bring support and chizuk, strength, to our brothers and sisters in Israel during this difficult time, and also to bear witness to the Hamas atrocities. As I was walking around just now, and of course since I've gotten back, which was just on Thursday, many have asked, how was your trip? And it's a hard question to answer. Thank God I've been fortunate to be at Israel many times. There have been other times I've been there during various conflicts, but nothing was like this trip. It was an intense 60 hours on the ground in Israel. I'll share experiences about it, but mostly I would say it was an important trip. A trip that was important for me and I think for us to know what is going on there, what exactly is happening on the ground, the hurt, the pain, but also the incredible resilience of the Israeli people. It's also important to be able to show our brothers and sisters there how much we support them and love them and are with them during this incredibly challenging time. You know, over the last month around here too, it's been kind of hard to even ask the question, how are you? Have you had that experience? Right? There's this heaviness that has kind of held over everything that we all have felt. And in Israel, the feeling has been even more so with that question. And my friend, Devorah Greenberg, who helped coordinate the trip, who I've worked with for many times on Ramah and various things, shared with us a poem that's been going around Israel about that question, how are you, about greeting others. It begins like this. Ma nishma, what's up? Butal, that greeting has been canceled. Instead, you should say, Ma nishmat, what's shaken? Ma nishbar, what's broken? Ma nishar, what remains? And instead of the standard response, Hakol beseder, everything's okay, instead we say, Hakol b'shever, everything is shattered. Hakol b'shever, everything is shattered. Many people in towns in Israel are shattered, literally and figuratively. And yet, so many are working to begin to put those pieces back together. In the aftermath of the trauma of October 7th, the ongoing war with Hamas, and the long road ahead. This morning we read Parshat Chayei Sarah, which despite being translated as the life of Sarah, begins with the story of Sarah's death. While I was in Israel, this juxtaposition between life and death was very apparent. We saw many heartbreaking examples of desecration and destruction, and also models of resilience and dedication to others that represents the very best of what it means to choose life. This morning, I will share some stories and experiences from my trip in two parts. The first part is stories of loss, and the second part are stories of life. I want to be clear that some of the things I'll be sharing from the Bima this morning will be difficult to hear. I witnessed things that no one should ever have to witness, let alone endure. Yet it is important to know that you know that we know the depth of the depravity that the Hamas terrorists committed against innocent Jewish men, women, the elderly, and children in their homes. The truth is that I'm going to save much of the most difficult parts of my trip for a conversation after Kiddush that we'll have in the Rose Chapel Janofsky Beit Midrash. You're invited to come after Kiddush to talk more and ask questions if you like. This morning, I'm not going to be asking questions, rather I'll be just sharing experiences. But if you think that it might be difficult for you to hear some of the things I share this morning, or perhaps you have children with you, I'll understand if you would like to step out when I speak after the third Aliyah. Now, this morning, thank God, as we have most Shabbat mornings at TBS, we have wonderful things to celebrate. Matthew's bar mitzvah that he's already off to a great start with. We have Josh and Rebecca's ofrof that we'll get to soon, and other celebrations and simchas that we'll be able to have together. And I think what I felt over this last month, and we're going to feel even more this morning, I'm sure you have too, is that, well, smachot are always sweet and wonderful. They're even sweeter and more wonderful these days. And I think we're going to feel that juxtaposition of Chayei Sarah this morning as we both reflect and bear witness, but also celebrate the resilience of our people, the true embodiment of Am Yisrael Chai. And so now we're going to begin reading that Torah portion, Chayei Sarah. It begins on page 127 in our Chumashim, the larger red volumes at your seats. Page 127, we begin reading. So as I said at the outset of the Torah reading, Chayei Sarah is a portion that reflects on life and death of our matriarch Sarah. And today, I'm reflecting on the life and death that I witnessed this past week in Israel. At this point now, I'll share some experiences about the depth of the destruction wrought by Israel by Hamas terrorists. This is the difficult part to hear, and if you think it's going to be too much, then it's okay. You can step outside. I'll begin by saying that one theme that came back over and over again during my 3 days there was that even though October 7th happened more than a month ago, Israelis are still in trauma. It's not PTSD, it's TSD, they said. And Idit, a woman from Sde Nitzan, a kibbutz that's 7.5 kilometers from the Gaza border, put it, she said that she's still waiting for the day after. It still feels like October 7th to her. That's because Idit and her family are still not allowed to go back home. Her teenage son, Itamar, was with her. He had classmates who were killed on October 7th and is still not in school because if you don't live at home, there's no school to go to. Their story is a familiar one in Israel. There are about 250,000 Israelis who are displaced from their homes in the south. They are spread out around Israel with family and in hotels. And the hotel we were staying at in Jerusalem, the Dan Panorama, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, was filled with refugee families from the south. They're spread around Israel and also around the world. I'm not sure if you know that Kalman Brown Academy has taken in tuition-free 20 Israeli students, refugees from Israel between the ages of 2 years old and 14 years old, who have had to leave. Many Jewish day schools around the country have done the same. All of these families who have had to leave their homes in the south also had family members and friends killed and kidnapped, and they're in a state of suspended animation. They can't even begin to rebuild because they can't go home. They can't go home. Let me share more about those who can't go home. We landed on Monday morning and headed straight to Tel Aviv. One of the first places we visited was the headquarters of support for families of the hostages. It really was an amazing place. It is run completely by civilian volunteers who provide everything that the families need. There are more than 15 retired diplomats who are there to help advocate for the hostages' release and to also coordinate interviews for the families to get their stories out. There are lawyers who deal with banks and landlords of the hostages to make sure that they understand why their bills and rent are not being paid. There are mental health professionals who donate their time to work with the families. And of course, there is a lot of food. So many volunteers are there to cook and deliver food to the families. After learning about this impressive operation, we met with Ayelet, the mother of 19-year-old Naama Levi, who is being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. Naama is the second of her 4 children. In high school, Naama studied diplomacy and participated in the Hands of Peace program. That's something that is kind of an interesting fact about many of those from the South. It was the members of the South who often were the most strong advocates for peace with the Palestinians, members who voted with the Labor Party or the Meretz Party, the more left-wing parties, because they had worked with Palestinians in Gaza and had helped and want to help try to see peace. And now they're the ones who are displaced and have families taken or killed. Naama also spent a year before the army volunteering in a lot in a kindergarten for African refugees. And Ayelet said that Naama likes to travel, dance, and, like any teenager, fight with her mom. She was just posted to an army base at Nahal Oz a few weeks ago, and was there when Hamas terrorists broke in. Ayelet said that all she wants is her daughter back. It was heartbreaking hearing Ayelet's story, which she told through tears. It is even more heartbreaking when you remember that this is just one of the 242 stories that are being told. This is a list of names of all the hostages that are taken. It was sent to me yesterday by Rakefet Ginsburg, the CEO of the Masorti movement in Israel. I didn't realize this, but every Friday this list is updated and posted. That's because in some cases it is almost impossible to verify who was killed and who was kidnapped, even more than a month later. They know Na'ama was kidnapped because there's a video of Hamas terrorists shoving her into a car that went viral shortly after October 7th. For others, they rely on the last known locations from their cell phones. Yet, there are still remains that have not been identified because of how brutally their bodies were attacked or even burned. Each week, names get added and removed from this list. That's why the number has been 199 or 220 or 238 or 242 as of last count. After speaking with Na'ama and seeing this organization to support the hostages, or the families of the hostages, we went to a square in front of the Tel Aviv Museum, which has been renamed Kikar HaChatufim, the Square of the Hostages. That's because it's where family members and friends and advocates gather every day. It has those pictures of the kidnapped hostages up everywhere. It's where the first empty Shabbat table was created that has now been replicated throughout the world, including in our community at the JCC. They have people playing somber music there, and also they look for donations and give away t-shirts to advocate for the hostages' return. Also there every day at 5 p.m., the Masorti movement, rabbis come and lead a service for those who want to participate. It's a service that I had the honor of co-leading with Rabbi Chaya Rowan Baker, Masorti rabbi in Israel, who's a friend and also the dean of the Schechter School of Rabbinic Studies. She works with Rabbi Ari Hasit there. And Rabbi Chaya and I led this service. This is the song sheet we use. It's a mixture of prayers and also Israeli songs like Lu Yahi, Al Kol Eila, Gesher Sar Ma'od, things like that we sing together through tears every day at 5 p.m. At one point, Rabbi Baker mentioned the 240 hostages, and right away, a man yelled out, 242, don't you forget a name. We will not and cannot forget even one of them. As one person we met said, even if I'm not related to them, I know them because they are my family. They are our family, and we will continue to demand their release. That's why we have that chair on our bima dedicated to 4 hostages, the Broditz family, their mother Hadar and their children, Ophir, 10 years old, Yuval, 8 years old, and Uriah, 4 years old. They are listed here as kidnapped from kibbutz Kfar Aza, a kibbutz that I visited on Tuesday. I first visited Kfar Aza with an AIPAC trip in 2018. Rabbi Lindemann has taken many groups there. I know many of you have been there as well. It's located just a couple of kilometers from the Gaza border. When we were there, we could see into Gaza City and hear the artillery. To go there, we had to put on helmets and flak jackets because it was an active war zone. Now, when I visited Kfar Aza the first time, we learned how residents live under the constant threat of Hamas rockets. They only have 10 to 15 seconds to get into a bomb shelter after the siren sounds. On October 7th, Hamas terrorists broke through the fence of the kibbutz and drove in pickup trucks with terrorists hanging out with AK-47s on the side throughout the kibbutz. It sounds like the scene from a movie, but it was real. They tore through the town, murdering men, women, and children in the most sadistic of ways. There were 900 residents in Kfar Aza before October 7th. On that day, 58 were murdered. and many more, including the Broditz family, were taken hostage. While we were there, we happened to meet one woman who had come back to Kfar Aza for the first time since October 7th. She said she was a third-generation resident. It was her first time coming back to Kfar Aza, and she pointed at the homes, telling us what happened to the people in each one of them. In that house, there were twin children who were taken hostage. That house was my friend Shlomi, who was killed. That house is people who were injured. One after the other, she named each person and what happened to them. She said she wanted to come back to rebuild, but she couldn't see herself raising children with Hamas next door in Gaza. Who could? There are more stories like that. We went to Ofakim, another town in the south, and met with former Knesset member Robert Tabayev, who, along with his neighbors, fought off Hamas terrorists in his quiet neighborhood, a neighborhood that had 17 people killed just on that street before the terrorists were repelled. We also stopped at a parking lot in Sdot Negev, but this was no ordinary parking lot. The cars that were in this parking lot had been towed from the Nova Music Festival. They belonged to the people who had gone there for a night celebrating music and peace, and instead were killed or taken captive by Hamas terrorists. Many of the cars were riddled with bullet holes and windows were knocked out, but as you walked through them and looked in, it looked like any one of our cars. A receipt, some snacks, a sweatshirt, all still there, waiting for someone or no one. It was a huge parking lot, and it was only one of two lots that were filled with cars whose owners may or may not ever come back to them. All of this is why people in Israel are not beseder. They're not okay. They are beshever, shattered. It's a lot to take in. The pain and suffering from October 7th is truly overwhelming, and the trauma of that day is ongoing. And the thing is, healing, many said, healing cannot begin until the hostages are home and Hamas is defeated. This is why Israel cannot agree to a ceasefire. This is why fighting cannot stop until Hamas is defeated. This is why nothing can end until those 242 men, women, and children, elderly and infants, the youngest one being 9 months old, though it's been a month since then, so now he's 10 months old. 1 month of that in Hamas captivity cannot end. Life in Israel cannot go on with Hamas next door, emboldened by their success of October 7th and waiting for another opportunity to attack. This is something that Israel and no country could ever tolerate. It's going to be a long road ahead, but we are traveling it with our brothers and sisters in Israel. We are traveling it together, and the donations we brought, the hugs we gave, that are going to be continued to be done by many more from America and around the world, the support and the advocacy we do that I'll talk more about after the next set of aliyot, really do help make a difference. Despite the death, there is also life, and incredible examples of that resilience and dedication to it that I witnessed in Israel that I'll share after a couple more aliyot. But to help us get ready for that and to move from this difficult things to hear to the good things, we have some life to celebrate here this morning. Our next aliyah, we're going to have our ofruf of Josh Warren and Rebecca Tilbor, who represents one of the newer Jewish families being built amongst the people in Israel, something that gives all of us great joy and great hope, not just for all of us here, for all the people of Israel. We'll continue reading the fourth aliyah, and we'll call Rebecca and Josh up for their ofruf. Good, so we had a birthday, we had an ofruf, and it's time to talk more about life and the incredible examples of resilience and heroism that I saw this week in Israel. On our first day, we stopped at an incredible organization called Brothers and Sisters for Israel, which in Hebrew is called Achim L'Neshek. This group was actually the protest movement before October 7th. They were the ones who were organizing the protests against the government's judicial overhaul legislation, and now they are working to provide resources to all Israelis literally overnight. On October 8th, they dedicated all the funds they had raised and their vast volunteer network to providing and mobilizing resources for families of the hostages, for soldiers, and refugees from the South. The reason it is there, we visited their largest warehouse of many that they have, and the largest one is in Tel Aviv. And it's actually in an underground parking garage. And the reason it's in the underground parking garage is because when it was above ground, the missile sirens would sound, and they had to run to the shelters, and they interrupted their work. They were tired of interrupting their work, so they moved underground. And this parking garage was incredible. This is where I brought the donations that many of you brought, the thermal clothing for the soldiers that they will distribute. They also have sections of toys and games for children, food, paper products, and chairs for people to use for shivas, and pretty much anything else you can imagine. They also now are currently working on building kindergartens in hotels for the children who are staying there, and also sports fields in different areas too for children to play. This is just one example of so many in which regular Israelis are stepping up to provide for those in need, and what they're doing is nothing short of astounding. It is the living embodiment of the phrase that we know from the Talmud, Kol Yisrael Aruvim Zeh Bazeh. All of Israel is responsible for one another. There are so many ways that this teaching was apparent. While we came to provide strength and support for Israelis, after a few moments of meeting them almost to the person, they always wanted to know how we were doing. They have heard about the large rise of anti-Semitism in America and around the world, the protests and intimidation that's happening on college campuses and in schools and our communities, and they wanted to know if we were okay. Even President Isaac Herzog, when we met with him, began by asking us to share what was going on in our communities. And he listened attentively and shared ideas and resources for how we can fight the anti-Semitism that we find here at home. A few people in that meeting also shared that they had sons and daughters currently serving the IDF, rabbis from abroad whose children were deployed in the north, the West Bank, or in Gaza. The president then did something that you'll only see in Israel. He took out a notepad and a pen, and he went around and asked each person for the Hebrew names of their son or daughter currently serving in the IDF. He meticulously wrote each name down and said that he would pray for them, like he prays for his own son who is currently serving in Gaza, and all of the Israeli soldiers each and every day. All of us are truly responsible to one another. By using the word Chaye Sarah for life to talk about Sarah's death, the Torah encourages us to think about living in a way that prioritizes life over everything else. And this is something that we saw in Israel over and over again, and strongly contrasts with the way of Hamas. While Hamas murders and desecrates human bodies, the rabbis of the IDF carefully make sure that everyone who is killed, no matter Jew or Muslim or Christian or Druze, is treated with respect. While Hamas builds underground tunnels underneath hospitals and homes and children's bedrooms to hide and to terrorize, Israel builds volunteer centers and even hospitals that are completely underground to better protect the living. We visited the new underground hospital that is being constructed by Hadassah on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. This joins hospitals in the north and the south that already have underground spaces that convert at a moment's notice to bring patients in and to treat people while missiles are raining down. Over and over again, Israelis and all of us choose life, just like our Torah tells us to do. And we also do this in the form of the incredible support that our amazing TBS family has provided to Israel over this last month. I was overwhelmed, really overwhelmed, by the response to the email I sent out saying that I was heading to Israel. I'm proud to say that we received more items than I could bring with me, and we are working to send them along to Israel. And not only that, I'm proud to say that we far exceeded the $10,000 in tzedakah I asked for. In total, we raised almost $80,000 to send to Israel. What an incredible community that understands our responsibility to our brothers and sisters there. About half of that money has already been donated to the Masorti movement, which is supporting refugees from the Saul, families of the hostages, and rabbis who are on the front line, some literally serving in Gaza, others serving in their communities. To the Schechter Institute for Jewish Study that's doing incredible work with the people of Ofakim, with whom they have a long relationship with, and also they're providing mental health services and also school curricula to help talk to children about what's going on. Help support brothers and sisters in Israel, the incredible volunteer network that they have, and also given directly to people in need, to families from the South who've been exiled who need funds to help purchase basic supplies. As we continue to allocate these funds, I'll let you know where they're going to. And I'm so overwhelmed by your generosity and commitment to Israel and the Jewish people. Truly, Am Yisrael Chai. And as wonderful as this tzedakah is, we know that needs will continue and that there are other ways we need to help. Thank you to those who reached out to Congressman Norcross to thank him for his support of Israel this week. I imagine that's something we'll need to continue to do with all of our government and elected officials. And I also hope that many of you will be traveling with me and Rabbi Wexler and Cantor Cohen and Rabbi Lindemann, Alex Weinberg, and many others to the Rally for Israel in D.C. this Tuesday. This rally is an important statement of support for Israel during this time. And I hope that you will sign up for one of the seats in the Federation's buses to come with us and make your way down there to make our voices and our presence felt and heard. Though we're all feeling a bit more beshever than beseder, all of this gives us hope. And not only that, we know from history that even in the darkest of times, good things can still come. As Rockefort Ginsburg, the CEO of the Masorti movement, reminded us as we concluded our time in Israel, 3 years after the Holocaust, Israel was founded. And 4 years after the Yom Kippur War, peace was made with Egypt. From tragedy can come opportunity, especially when we do everything we can to try and make our future better. That's what I saw happening in Israel. Israelis doing what they can, whether it's in the IDF or as volunteers, to try and make not only today, but the future better. That's what we are doing in our own community, giving tzedakah and donations and advocating and communicating, do what we can to try to make our future better. May all of our work together help us achieve this. And may the work we do lead to a safer and more peaceful Israel and world for all of us. Kei Yehi Ratzon, so may it be.